California, sometime in the middle of the 1960s. You pull in off the boulevard and the gravel crunches under your tires, and you don't even turn the engine off all the way before she appears. Car hop, tray already balanced on her forearm, pen already in her hand, like she knew you were coming before you did. The menu is the size of a placemat. The burger costs 65 cents. The radio is already playing something good. And your kids are in the back seat, and they are not going anywhere, and neither are you. Not yet. Not for a while. That was a California drive-in restaurant in the 1960s. Not just a place to eat, a place to stop moving, voluntarily, in a state that was always moving. 9 of them are gone now, some of them gone for 50 years. Most people never got a chance to say goodbye. Some of these places fed the same families for a decade straight, and they were gone before those families ever noticed they were disappearing. One of them changed American music forever, and nobody ever put that on the sign. These are the 9 forgotten California drive-in restaurants from the 1960s. Let's go back. Mel's Drive-In, San Francisco. If you want to understand what a California drive-in restaurant was, not the idea of it, not the nostalgia postcard version, but the real beating heart version, start here. Start with Mel's. Mel Weiss and Harold Dobbs opened the first Mel's Drive-In in San Francisco in 1947. That original spot on South Van Ness had a parking for 110 cars and a kitchen that could turn out 180 hamburgers a minute, not an hour, a minute. By the time the 1960s arrived, there were Mel's locations spread across Northern California, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, Sacramento, San Jose, Salinas. You could drive almost anywhere in the Bay Area and find that neon sign glowing in the distance. The car hops wore uniforms. The booths inside had Formica tabletops and vinyl cushions that squeaked when you slid in. There was a row of stools at a circular counter and a battery of pie cases behind the glass and coffee urns that never seemed to empty. This was the invisible architecture of the drive-in, the rhythm of it. Pull in, flash your lights once, wait for the car hop, order what you already know you're going to order. There was no decision to make at Mel's. The decision made itself. George Lucas grew up watching places like Mel's. When he made American Graffiti in 1973, he picked the original South Van Ness location to stand in for Burger City, because Mel's was what the drive-in looked like when it was everything. But by 1972, Weiss and Dobbs had sold the chain. The car hop service had already been quietly retired in the early 1960s. The world was moving too fast for the tray on the window. Mel's is still with us today, in a different form, but the original, the one with the 110-car lot and the car hops and the neon that you could see from 3 blocks away, that one is gone.
Tiny Nailers, Hollywood. 6 feet 4 inches tall, 300 pounds. His name was William Wallace Naylor, and he went by Tiny. That is not a story someone invents. That is a California original. Tiny Naylor had been running waffle shops across Central California since the late 1920s. Fresno, Modesto, Stockton, Sacramento, a dozen cities in between. But in the late 1940s, he moved to Los Angeles, hired an architect named Douglas Honnold, and built something at the corner of Sunset Boulevard and La Brea Avenue that people stopped their cars just to look at. Humphrey Bogart compared the slanted canopy roof to a huge bird about to take off. That is the review you put on the sign. Tiny Naylor's was Googie architecture, that particular California style of the 1950s and 60s that looked like it was designed by someone who had just returned from the future. Swooping roof lines, plate glass, neon at every angle. A building that refused to apologize for being excited. And the menu, this was not a standard drive-in menu. Tiny Nailers served ribs, steak, corn on the cob, baked potatoes, things that had no business coming through a car window, and they came through perfectly on a tray that hung from your half-rolled-down window like it had been invented specifically for that purpose. The place ran 24 hours. Movie stars came because they could eat in their cars and remain anonymous. Regular families came because the patty melt, which Tiny Nailers claimed to have invented, cost less than $1 and tasted like someone had genuinely thought about it. Tiny Nailer himself died in 1959 at the Del Mar racetrack doing exactly what he loved. His son, Biff Naylor, ran the chain afterward. The original Hollywood location closed in March of 1984 and was demolished shortly after. A shopping center stands there now. Vandekamp's Drive-In, Atwater Village. Not every California drive-in tried to look like the future. Vandekamp's looked like the Netherlands. Theodore Vandekamp started with a small bakery stand in downtown Los Angeles in 1915. By the time his brand reached its peak, there were more than 300 Vandekamp's locations across Southern California, every one of them wearing a spinning Dutch windmill on the roof. The drive-in location in Atwater Village, on the corner of Fletcher Drive and San Fernando Road, was one of the most beloved. People who grew up going there still describe it the same way. The windmill turning slowly overhead, the servers in their blue and white Dutch costumes, the lemon chiffon pie behind the glass case that you ate before you fully understood what pie could be. A woman who graduated from Franklin High School in 1948 wrote about it later. This drive-in was one of her favorite places to hang out with friends. Sorry it no longer exists. Anyway, had a lot of fun there eating burgers and shakes. That is a sentence that contains an entire life. The Vandekamp's drive-ins were comfort built into architecture. The windmill was not practical. It served no functional purpose, but it told you from half a mile away that you were going somewhere that cared how it made you feel. The chain went out of business in 1990. The last surviving windmill-topped building is now a Denny's in Arcadia. The windmill is still there. Locals fought to keep it when Denny's tried to remove it in 1999. Sometimes a windmill is worth fighting for. Scrivener's Drive-In, Hollywood. Most drive-ins served food. Scrivener's, at the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Cahuenga in Hollywood, accidentally invented something else entirely. The chain was owned by Charles Wesley Scrivener and managed by his son, John Jay. They had several locations across Los Angeles: Crenshaw and Jefferson, Wilshire and Crenshaw, Imperial Highway and Western. Teenagers liked them all. But the Hollywood location became something different starting in 1955. That was the year a radio personality named Art Laboe, broadcasting on KOPP, got the idea to haul his equipment to the parking lot and do his show live from the drive-in. 200 cars on a Saturday night, teenagers dedicating songs to each other through the radio, Ricky Nelson showing up in the parking lot, Elvis Presley giving his first Hollywood radio interview to Laboe himself. The show was eventually broadcast live on KTLA television, beamed into California living rooms from a drive-in parking lot. Laboe would later recall, "We used to get 200 cars on a Saturday night. That was in 1955 and 1956. It was the birth of rock and roll." This is the loop we planted at the beginning. One of these restaurants changed American music forever, and nobody ever put it on the sign. Scrivener's didn't advertise that it was the place where the concept of the song dedication was born. It didn't advertise that Art Laboe watched the audience pile in and started making lists of the most requested songs, lists that would eventually become the oldies but goodies albums that defined a generation's relationship to its own past. It just served hamburgers and let history happen in the parking lot. Scrivener's closed in the 1960s. None of the locations remain. The Hollywood Walk of Fame has a star for Art Laboe. There is nothing marking what happened at Sunset and Cahuenga.
Dolores Drive-In, Beverly Hills. There are restaurants you remember for what they served, and then there are restaurants you remember for the specific words you used to order. Dolores Drive-In was the second kind. Amanda and Ralph Stevens opened the first Dolores in Hollywood in 1944. The Beverly Hills location came later, a semicircular building with copper walls and a copper turret at the center, on Wilshire Boulevard near La Cienega, a few minutes from where the stars lived. It opened in 1946 and became a fixture of Beverly Hills' teenage life for the next 3 decades. You ordered the Jumbo Jim Double-Decker with extra Z sauce. You ordered the Suzy Q's, which is what Dolores called their French fries, long and curled and specific to that parking lot. You ordered a Cherry Lime Ricky, and you said those words, Cherry Lime Ricky, like they were the most natural words in the English language, which they were if you had grown up going there. The whole order cost less than $1. The tray hung from your window. The Frida Schroeder cake with hot fudge sauce arrived in a little dish. The car hop service was, by the accounts of everyone who experienced it, legendary. One person who grew up there described the building later. I remember it being a semicircle with copper walls and a copper turret in the center of the circle. That detail, copper walls, copper turret, is the kind of detail that lives in the body, not just the memory. You see a photograph of it now, and you don't recognize the building so much as feel like you've forgotten something important. In 1981, the Beverly Hills location was forced to close to make room for a high-rise office building. The last walk-in Dolores is still operating on Santa Monica Boulevard, but the one with the copper walls and the Suzy Q's and the tray on the window, that one has been an office building for 40 years. Gordon's Drive-In, Santa Rosa. Not every drive-in was in Los Angeles. Not every drive-in had to be. Gordon's Drive-In on 4th Street in Santa Rosa was the kind of place that a city the size of Santa Rosa needed the way it needed a water tower or a Main Street church. It was a landmark. It was where you went to be seen. Where Choan Patton, Miss Sonoma County, posed for photographs in the parking lot in 1959. Where teenagers in the early 1960s made plans that had no practical content, just the plan to be at Gordon's. It had started as Quinley's Drive-In, and by the time it became Gordon's, it had already been the social center of that corner of Northern California for a generation. What closed it in the end was not the competition, it was the road itself. In the late 1960s, the widening of 4th Street and College Avenue significantly reduced Gordon's parking lot. The parking lot was not incidental to a drive-in restaurant. The parking lot was the restaurant. When you took away enough of it, you took away the whole thing. Gordon's closed. The building became several other restaurants over the years, the way old buildings do when the thing that made them matter has left, and they're still standing, waiting to be something else. That is how most of these places went. Not with a dramatic closing, just a slow subtraction until there was nothing left to subtract. Here is what was happening in California in the middle of the 1960s. The freeways were going in. The fast food chains, McDonald's had been spreading from its California origins since the mid-1950s, were multiplying faster than anyone had anticipated. They required no car hop. They required no tray. They required no specific language for ordering, no particular words, no relationship between the person ordering and the person serving. The Dolores Drive-In had been built on a set of invisible assumptions that time was available, that the ritual of waiting for a car hop was enjoyable rather than inconvenient, that eating in your car was something you did because you chose to, rather than because there was no other option. By the mid-1960s, America had started to disagree with those assumptions, or at least it had started to act as if it disagreed with them. The drive-ins that closed in the 1960s did not fail. They were not worse than what replaced them. They were simply operating in a world that no longer had the 30 minutes they required. The loop we planted at the beginning of this video. Some of these places fed the same families for a decade straight and were gone before those families noticed they were disappearing. This is what that looks like up close. The disappearing was not visible as it was happening. It only became visible afterwards. Lund's Drive-In, Petaluma. Milton Earl Lund was born November 4, 1925. He died March 16, 2010. In the decades between those dates, he ran a drive-in restaurant on Petaluma Boulevard South that was, by all accounts, the kind of place a town like Petaluma was lucky to have. There is a photograph from the 1960s that shows Milton Lund standing with two of his carhops, superimposed on a copy of the restaurant menu. He is smiling. The carhops are in uniform. The menu shows what Lund's served, the kinds of things that made a drive-in feel like a complete meal rather than a quick stop. He ran the place himself, the way drive-in owners of that era ran things, present, attentive, knowing the regulars by name and by order. Lund's was a popular place for teens and families alike on Petaluma Boulevard South, that particular combination of customers that only a drive-in could hold at the same time without either group feeling unwelcome. In 2007, decades after the drive-in had closed, someone photographed Milton Lund holding a picture of his restaurant. He is still smiling in that photograph, still holding the memory of the place like it weighed something. He would have been 81 or 82 years old in that photograph. He had outlived his drive-in by a long time. Most people who ran these places did. 49er Drive-In, Santa Rosa. The 49er Drive-In, sometimes written the 49er Drive-In, placed an advertisement in the March 26, 1963 issue of the Press-Democrat. It was a burger joint on 4th Street in Santa Rosa, about a mile from Gordon's. It served what every drive-in in California served in 1963. Hamburgers, milkshakes, the particular combination of things that tasted different in a car than they would have tasted anywhere else. We know about it because of the advertisement. We know about the advertisement because someone saved it. That is the thing about small local drive-ins. Their history is almost entirely preserved by accident. A newspaper clipping here, a photograph there, a diary entry from someone who worked the counter. The 49er was not famous. It was not connected to movie stars or radio personalities. It was a local drive-in in a mid-sized California city serving the people who lived there, the way thousands of local drive-ins across California did in the early 1960s. And that is exactly why it belongs on this list. The famous drive-ins, the Mel's, the Tiny Nailers, those had a fighting chance because their names carried weight. The 49er Drive-In had no weight to carry except the loyalty of the people who ate there. When those people stopped coming or started going somewhere faster, somewhere cheaper by another 10 cents, somewhere that didn't require them to sit and wait, the 49er had nothing left to stand on. That is the decision that killed most California drive-ins. Not a single choice by any single owner. 1,000 small decisions by 1,000 regular customers who had no idea in any individual moment that they were making a final choice.
Ott's Drive-In, San Francisco. We end in San Francisco, not at the beginning of our story, but close to it. Ott's Drive-In at 550 Bay Street had been promoting its fast service since 1949. By 1964, it had become one of the first places in San Francisco to experiment with automated drive-in systems, a sign that the world the car hop had built was already being quietly replaced, even inside the drive-in itself. There's a photograph of Ott's from 1964. Just the building, the parking lot, the Bay Street address. Nothing dramatic in the frame. A drive-in restaurant looking like a drive-in restaurant in the middle of a decade that was about to stop needing drive-in restaurants.
That photograph is what most of these places left behind. Not a monument, not a museum exhibit. A photograph in a local archive, cataloged by someone who understood that ordinary things deserve to be remembered precisely because they were ordinary. The Otts building on Bay Street is gone now. What went with it, what went with all 9 of these places, was something that California's architects and city planners and fast food executives didn't have a name for and therefore didn't know they were removing. It was the texture of stopping, the physical fact of a place you could pull into and stay in your car and have someone bring you something and not be anywhere else for half an hour. Not in a hurry, not on the way to something, just there. California in the 1960s was one of the most accelerating places on Earth, and for a little while, scattered across the state from San Francisco to Hollywood to Santa Rosa to Petaluma, there were 9 places, among hundreds, where that acceleration was allowed to pause. Nobody memorialized them when they closed. Nobody should have had to. They were supposed to still be there.